Ayn Rand's The Virtue of Selfishness, or The Virtue of Selfishness by Ayn Rand. Now, this is one of those books that I don't have necessarily because I don't agree with much that she has to say in this, but I think this is an important kind of piece of a bigger puzzle. The Virtue of Selfishness was originally published, I think, if I understand it right, it was actually published originally as like a series of articles in the Objectivist newsletters, and then went to press as an actual book in 1961. And this is the 1964 printing that I have here. Now, first off, what is this? This is the Virtue of Selfishness. It's, as she explains in the beginning of her book, that yes, this is a provocative title, and her whole thesis is basically the idea that altruism is bad, that helping other people out is really kind of crippling them, and ultimately by bettering yourself and doing what you can for yourself, you're actually going to help everybody out. Kind of the trickle-down economics of the Reagan era distilled into a book in a sense. Now, here's the interesting thing. This is kind of funny because this is one of the few things that I would agree with Christopher Hitchens on, the late Christopher Hitchens on, is, as he pointed out, that if you look around you in society, very few people need a book on how to be more selfish. So this is a book that really didn't need to be printed. But this is a very interesting work, because if you spend any time in corporate circles, or what I sometimes jokingly refer to as the reptilian hive or the reptilian overlords, which I say with hopefully noticeable hyperbole, but if you spend any time in the corporate world, you will encounter a lot of people who think like this. And this kind of literature is fascinating to me, because when you really start studying this kind of stuff, which is really a manifesto for a-holes, to put it politely, you'll see a trend where this is not really meant to be studied the way you would academically study a subject. This is to be passively absorbed in a way that is just echoes your worst inclinations. And you pick up this kind of book to be validated in some of your worst personality traits. And I've got a few books like this that really tap into that take something that would normally be a personality trait that you would really want to work on and do your best to kind of rid yourself of this quality, and instead say, no, you're exactly right the way you are. Which is funny, because a lot of this writing is really popular on the Republican end of the political spectrum, I wouldn't say far right, but the right side of the political spectrum, which a lot of this thinking is also what's a lot of the psychological underpinning of this is actually what's also used in a lot of the far left leaning. This whole idea of that don't change who you are exactly, your core inclinations are actually what's good. Now, she dresses this up in the trappings of looking like this is a really profound statement. And she actually does say some really good stuff about human nature and how human nature is very different from the animals, which is really funny, because she was very diametrically opposed to any kind of spiritual belief. But she does probably the one good thing in this book is she does a great job of articulating how we are different from animals. And that was the one thing I found in this that was actually worthwhile. But the bulk of this is again, a validation of some of the worst inclinations of humans. And you could really dispel much of this book just by explaining to Ayn Rand that enabling is not the same as altruism. And that pretty much throws the whole thesis out the window, because her whole straw man argument is that any kind of altruism is actually crippling yourself. And this self-immolation of that's required by religion of helping other people out. And again, enabling is really what she's attacking. And she's kind of deliberately creating the straw man of saying that any kind of aid that's given to other people is actually an act of, is actually, again, she's calling any kind of helping enabling, although she doesn't use that word. And anyone, as a business owner myself, if you are bluntly honest with yourself, you know that you didn't get to where you're at because you pulled yourself up by your own bootstraps, you did everything yourself, and you owe nothing to no one. Anyone being honest with where they are in life knows they owe where they're at to a lot of influences, a lot of people, and a lot of things. So again, this really plays into that people who are probably narcissistically inclined, I might say. I don't know if that's probably the most polite way to put that. But back to my experiences in the corporate world, years ago, in fact, about 21 years ago, I was talking to a guy high up in the corporate structure of a business I was working with, and we were discussing the Enron fiasco. At the time, that was, of course, big news here in Texas. And I was shocked at that age. I think I was about 28, 29 or so at the time. And I was blown away by how this had been, how the whole Enron fiasco had really screwed over a lot of people. A lot of people had lost everything in that because of this, all the fraudulent corporate behavior. And because that was weighed heavily on my mind, I thought that was something worth talking about with this particular gentleman. And he heard me out politely, and then he, rather than say, "Oh yeah, that's a problem," he stopped me and said, "I think you can do in business whatever people will let you do." And I was stunned. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. I kind of hid my shock and went about my business, but man, did that stick with me, because when I later stumbled onto Ayn Rand's writings, that made a lot more sense why somebody would say that. But that is the epitome of that kind of corporate thinking, that I can do whatever someone will let me do. And that, when you start, that's what corporate thinking is at its core, especially when you strip away the ethics and any other moral checks and balances that you have within yourself. That's what you're left with. And you're left with a person who would take kidneys from the mentally handicapped because they would let them do it. If they would let them do it, then they are inclined. In fact, like she says in here, you really have a duty to do that sort of thing. And that's the other troubling thing. She dresses this up in a lot of intellectual garb, but really, again, at its core is basically a very predatory mindset, and very much based on social Darwinism of you're doing what's best for you is ultimately what will help everybody else out. And some of these people, if they don't know any better, then she doesn't give the implicit command to exploit, but if you read between the lines, you get the idea that these people these are just dull idiots that can't think for themselves. So where you and I would like to think, well, those are people that need to be woke up and alerted to the problems in the universe, someone embracing this mindset sees those people as prey. So very much as the wolves and sheep kind of mentality. But one last thing about this. So, and I might come back to this at some point, because there's a lot of philosophical stuff to digest in this, and I do recommend this just as a cautionary tale. Read it and process it, and then look at the corporate structure and look at people in that world, and especially the higher up you get, the more of this kind of stuff you'll encounter. One of the kind of funny things she does in this is she quotes from her own writing. She quotes John Galt, which of course is a fictional character from Atlas Shrugged. And she quotes from him liberally through this, and does so in a manner as though he is a real person to be quoted, which I thought was kind of a pompous writing style to quote yourself in writing material for a fictional character. You know, you could just say the same thing I said in book so-and-so about, you know, you don't necessarily have to quote it as though it is you are your own source. Anyway, so I'm going to read this one part though, because this is, I think, those of you of a similar spiritual bent to myself will find this part interesting. And before I read this, one of the reasons I went back and really dug into Ayn Rand's work was I think it's Johnny Todd. I've reviewed the book about him a couple of years ago. It's in, if you search, you'll find it on my channel. But Johnny Todd was allegedly an occultist, a high-level occultist who allegedly was part of the Illuminati or something like that. And then he went around giving a lot of lectures to the evangelical church circle about warning about the influence of Satanism and things like that in music, and just warning about occult influences in pop culture and that sort of thing. And a lot of people, when he first popped on the scene, a lot of the evangelicals really were kind of fascinated with the guy, claiming that he was a former witch or warlock or whatever. But the funny thing was, a lot of the high-level evangelical people, like a lot of televangelists, attacked him relentlessly. In fact, the book that I review is actually just a book-length attack on Johnny Todd. So that's kind of funny too. But one of the claims that he made that a lot of people laughed off was that he said Ayn Rand's teachings were in essence, the same as the Church of Satan, and just presented for a different audience. And I thought that was really interesting, an interesting claim. So that got me kind of digging back into her work. And that's when I stumbled on this. This is at the very beginning, the opening salvo. And again, here she does exactly what I'm talking about here. She says, "Since I am going to speak on objectivist ethics, I shall begin by quoting its best representative, John Galt, in Atlas Shrugged." So this is her quoting herself by way of her fictional character. "Through centuries of scourges and disasters brought about by your code of morality, you have cried that your code had been broken, that the scourges were punishment for breaking it, that men were too weak and too selfish to spill all the blood it required. You damned man, you damned existence, you damned this earth, but never dared to question your code. You went on crying that your code was noble, but human nature was not good enough to practice it. And no one rose to ask the question, good? By what standard?" Now, the astute reader will notice that is a rebuke of God. That is Ayn Rand, through her character John Galt, rebuking God. So I found that very curious in light of Johnny Todd's claims about her. Now, again, Johnny Todd is a totally different subject for another video. But at the end of this, I will link to that review so you can check that out too, because that's a really hard to find book. But anyway, I'm curious, those of you who've stumbled onto Ayn Rand's writings, like I said, there is that narrow spectrum of this where she does differentiate man from animal, and I think she does actually a really good job of articulating that. But overall, at its core, what's being pushed here is, I don't know, I'll stop shy of saying sinister, but again, we have no deficit of selfish people on this planet. It's really, what she's pushing is validation of the worst inclinations of people. And most everyone I've encountered that's read this, and I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but most of the people in my personal experience that I've encountered who've read this book and held this up as some kind of high holy manifesto were people who really latched onto that really wanted that. My ex-wife was one that found her way to a lot of that kind of literature, that what they really were looking for is a validation to do the things that otherwise felt kind of dirty to them. And doggone it, Ayn Rand helps them out. So anyway, I'll stop there, but I think this is a curious little piece of that overall puzzle. And again, especially if you are in the corporate universe, you've probably encountered this. My late father-in-law, when he worked for a pretty major company running restaurants before he was a pharmacist, he was required to read Atlas Shrugged, and they wanted the spouses of all the executives to also read Atlas Shrugged, which my mother-in-law still thinks is pretty hilarious. So anyway, I'll stop there. But thanks again for watching, and of course be sure to check the Johnny Todd link, and I'll put something else up there too at the end of the video.